Welcome everybody to our event today. I hope you can see my screen and I hope you can see me. And if you would like to tell me a little bit about where you're from, maybe your university, maybe your name, please feel free to put that information into the chat box. What we have here is the first in a series of webinars that we are hosting jointly with our colleagues at Bentham Science Publishers. So as I mentioned before, my name is Gareth Dyke. I'm the content director at Research Square Company. You're all very welcome to our webinar today. It's the 7th of June. It's 10 o'clock in the morning in British summertime. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon in China. It's 6 o'clock in the afternoon in Japan. And we are going to be talking today about how to use a manuscript processing system effectively. You can see on the screen in front of you that this is indeed one in a series of events that we have planned with our colleagues at Bentham Science. So if you'd like to get in touch with the colleagues, you can see their contact information down there on the right, on the left-hand side of the screen, excuse me. Why not take a screenshot of those contact informations? You can see that we have a webinar at the same time each week. Today, how to use a manuscript processing system effectively. This time next week, how to plan your research for publication in high impact factor journals. Then managing peer review as an early career researcher. Then responding and communicating effectively with editors and reviewers. On the 5th of July, citation booster, enhancing the reach, readership and visibility of your publications. On the 12th of July, academic branding, improving your visibility, networking and career opportunities. On the 19th of July, we're going to be talking about some common English language mistakes. At AJE, we edit hundreds of thousands of papers every year. So we get to see a lot of the mistakes that authors often make. So we can help you to avoid those mistakes in your own work. And we're wrapping up our series of joint events with Bentham Science on the 28th of July, journal selection to maximize your career potential. Thank you to those colleagues who've put their information, their name, where you're from in the chat box. I do encourage you to continue to do that. That would be absolutely fantastic. If you'd like more information about this series of events, I'll give you some QR codes that you can scan a little bit later on in this presentation. Do take a screenshot of this first screen so that you can get in touch with Faizan or Cassie if you'd like more information about this series of events. Well, let's get going. Just coming up on 4 minutes past the hour. Today, in the first in our series, we are going to be talking about using a manuscript processing system effectively. I'm Gareth. I'm the content director at Research Square Company. Manuscript processing, submitting a paper to an international journal is something that many people take for granted. And it's certainly something that publishers, journals take for granted. Kishar is asking for attendance certificates. Absolutely. Colleagues are asking about playbacks. Yes, absolutely. Everybody listening to this will get access to the playback, to the recording of this event, of course. So don't worry if I talk too fast or something happens and you don't quite catch it. You'll be able to listen back to the recording of this event later. We'll pass that out to all attendees. Using a manuscript processing system effectively. Gareth Dyke is my name. Here's a little bit of information about me. I studied in the UK. I worked in the United States. I worked in Ireland for a number of years. In the UK and in Hungary. In my academic career, I've published about 280 academic papers, something like that, some in good journals, some in not so good journals. And I'm also an editor working for a journal that's published by Taylor and Francis. And you'll see a bit more information about that journal a little bit later on in our presentation today. Just to reiterate, the first in our series of joint events with Bentham Science Publishers. You'll see a little bit later on more contact information, more information about our series so that you can get in touch with colleagues at our company, at Research Square Company, or at Bentham Science Publishers to learn more both about our services and about how we can help you with these training events. Here's that series again. We've got quite a number. You can take a screenshot of this. I do encourage you to circulate it amongst your networks, share it with your colleagues, share it with your students, share it with anybody who you think might be interested in attending our free events. And there's contact information there down on the left-hand side of the screen. Again, attendance certificates and a recording of this event will be provided for everybody here today. Bentham Science, of course, major international scientific, technical and medical research publisher. Bit more about them a little bit later. More than 170 online and print journals, more than 1,000 online and print books, providing information solutions for researchers involved in various disciplines. If you're not aware of Bentham Science, then I do encourage you to have a look at the website eurekaselect.com or eurekaselect.net. Have a look at those websites. Those are sites where you'll be able to have a look at the Bentham Science content. Let me just type that again for you because I did make a mistake. Eureka Select. Eurekaselect.com. Fantastic opportunity to have a look at the Bentham Science journals. And everybody, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of our session today. If you do have questions, please type them into the chat box. Here are some screenshots of that eurekaselect.com website where you can go and learn about the content that Bentham Science Publishers have, as I mentioned on the previous slide, a large selection of journals and books and quite decent article processing charges. So a fantastic opportunity for you in terms of journal selection, as we'll talk about a little bit later as well in this series. And also today, if you're looking for a place for your next publication, then perhaps one of the Bentham Science journals would be for you. Now, the academic publishing cycle. We're going to be talking about this cycle over the course of our series of events together. And we all go round and around this cycle all of the time as researchers. You may be at different stages in the academic publishing cycle with different publications, with different pieces of your research. You may have several projects on the go that are at different stages of the academic publishing cycle. Your ideas, generating funding, collecting data, journal selection, paper writing, submission, which is what we're going to be talking about today, effectively and efficiently managing your article submissions. And I'm going to show you inside a number of journal submission sites so that I hope that next time you have to make a submission to an international journal, you'll be able to do it a little bit more effectively. So that's stage 6. Then, of course, comes peer review and publication. And then we go round and around and around and around the academic publishing cycle again and again and again. We're all doing it. We're all at different stages. Our goal at Research Square Company is to help researchers at different stages of this cycle with different services. Much of my role involves providing free training. So if you've enjoyed this presentation, please do sign up to the others in our series with Bentham Science Publishers, or get in touch and we'd be delighted to show up virtually at your institution and provide some additional training to you and to your students. Right, you have got a paper ready for submission to an international journal. That's what we're talking about in this webinar today, using and managing journal submission sites effectively. Now, you're ready to submit. This slide just summarizes some of those final checks that you must make as an author before you go ahead and make that submission. And I'll talk in a minute about the different submission sites and how to use them, but you must be aware of editorial policies and publication ethics when it comes time to make a submission of a manuscript of a paper to an international journal. authorship and author responsibilities, research integrity. If the paper has been translated, is that clearly stated in the document? Have you had your paper run initially through a plagiarism check? That's something that we can do for you if you're confused about that, because of course submission systems and international journals will always check your paper for plagiarism when you make that submission. Are there any conflicts of interest? Bioethics. Will you need to make any corrections at a later stage? That's also very important. So check carefully your final document after your paper's been accepted and you're now ready to make that submission. Are all of the people who contributed to the paper listed as authors? Have you provided all of the statements that your journal, your publisher is asking for in terms of research integrity and in terms of translations? Have you checked your English document for plagiarism? Have you stated in the acknowledgements any potential conflicts of interest? And by that, I mean, did you get funding from an entity that may have an interest potentially in the outcome of the study? Things to check, because when you make a submission, your journal is going to check these items as well. And often international journals will desk reject papers if you are missing any of these key pieces. So if you have questions about making submissions, do reach out to us. We're always here to help. We're always here to give you a helping hand checking your papers before submission. Now, when your paper goes into the submission system, and of course it does get sent by the editor out for peer review, and be aware that lots of international journals do desk reject papers. As I've already mentioned, they do that in part to control content. They also do that in part to keep their rejection levels up. But peer review, of course, is the function that filters and improves content for researchers. It's the quality control step that international journals use in order to make sure that the content they're publishing meets standards. So you should be selecting a journal for your submissions that's using peer review. Don't be publishing your research in journals that don't use peer review, because of course that's a waste of a submission. All reputable international journals, all journals listed in Scopus, ISI, ISSI, in any of the Web of Science databases must be using peer review. So initially, before you go into the submission system, do check that your journal is using peer review. Now, this slide, a little bit complicated looking perhaps, but this slide summarizes for you the three main online systems used by international journals. And we're going to have a look in a little bit more detail at Scholar One in this presentation, as well as the submission system that Bentham Science publishers use as well. You're going to be submitting your paper into a manuscript submission system. You need to check before you do that which system your journal is using. Scholar One, Editorial Manager, Open Journal Systems are the three main online systems that journals around the world use. First thing to check, do you have an account? Are you familiar with how that submission system is working? Secondly, coordinate your login information. Make sure that you have all of your login information available when you make the submission. What's the easiest way to do that? The easiest way to do that is to link to an ORCID ID. And I'll show you a little bit more information in a minute about what ORCID IDs are if you're unaware of those, but it's a good idea to get an ORCID ID, orcid.org. It's a great way to speed up your manuscript submission. And then thinking about putting your paper into that online system, have a think about what you need to have. Are you aware of all the names, the affiliations, the emails, the ORCID IDs for all of your co-authors? Have you got all your individual document files available for the submission as standalone individual files? So your main document, your tables, your figures, and any supplements as separate files, because most online submission systems will ask you for tables, figures, the main document as separate files, which they then collate into a PDF that gets processed by the editorial office and sent out for review, for example. Something else to have thought about before you make your submission: suggestions for reviewers. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but you should have some suggestions for potential peer reviewers ready to go when you make your submission. The journal might not use them, but it's nevertheless always a good idea to have those ready when you make your submission. You also need an effective cover letter. I'll show you how to put together an effective cover letter in a minute. And you should also be aware of any potential conflicts of interest, because your journal submission system is going to ask you for those. You need to put them in. You may get caught out later if you don't. And the last thing that you want to happen to a piece of your research is that it gets retracted or rejected later because you're not saying something that you should be saying at the time that you make that initial submission. So building out the information that you should have ready to submit when you put your paper into a system, an ORCID ID is very important. ORCID.org is a not-for-profit charitable organization that provides a unique researcher or institutional identification number to you that ties you or your institution. Your institution may also have an ORCID account. When you sign up your ORCID ID, it will tie you to your institution. When you put that information in, if your institution has an identification number, it ties you to your research output, so to your papers, peer review that you do, grant applications and conferences, and so on. It's very well worth doing because, of course, it's free of charge, and it's a great way to build your CV without doing much work, because the system will collate all of your outputs together in a single place. Online submission systems from international journals are increasingly asking for these IDs, and so increasing numbers of researchers around the world have signed up for one of these unique numbers, and we recommend that you should as well. Have a look at orcid.org. We're here to help with the sign-up process if you need help. Basically then, it's a persistent digital identifier that distinguishes you from every other researcher. Register, add your info, and then start using your ORCID ID. Imagine in the UK, where I'm from, lots of people, they're called Smith. That's a very common last name in England. Lots of researchers with the last name Smith. How am I going to find the right John Smith when I'm searching through all of the literature? Well, I can do that using John Smith's ORCID ID. So have a look at doing this, identify yourself, speed up the submission system, and also use it as a way to build your CV, build your profile online without having to do all that much work. We do recommend ORCID ID numbers. Here's the dashboard. You can see I'm putting in my Gmail account there. I'm signing up. I've got my personal account. I go in and fill it up with all of the information about me so that other people can learn about me when they search for me online. It really is very useful. I didn't fill in much information at the time that I made this screenshot, but you can see here that you can go in, it will populate your account with all of your publications, searching for your name like in the standard databases, but you can also put in your employment history, education, invited positions, your membership, so on and so forth. Use it as a way to build your CV. So especially recommended for young researchers. Certainly it's a great idea because lots of online submission systems, as you'll see in a minute, do expect you to have one of these IDs when you make a submission to a journal. So here you can see just another screenshot from my own account with some of my publications uploaded there into the system. It's a great thing. We really do recommend it, and it will help you to be more effective when making article submissions. Now, the other thing to think about when submitting a paper to an international journal is what kind of peer review will that international journal be using? What kind of peer review will that international journal be using? Because when you make the submission, you need to know that information in order to prepare your document properly. So Here's a summary of the different kinds of peer review that international journals use. Blind peer review, where the reviewer is anonymous to the author, but the reviewer knows who the author is, right? That's blind or single blind. You don't know who the reviewer is, but the reviewer knows who you are. The reviewer is anonymous to the author. It's the most common kind of peer review that international journals do use. Double blind, however, on the other hand, is where both you and the reviewer do not know each other's identity. And this is often thought in many countries to be a fairer model. You can see some data in table 5 here on the right-hand side of this slide. In China, for example, and in India, for example, DBPR, double-blind peer review compared to single-blind peer review is used by an increasing proportion of researchers because people tend to feel that people may, discriminate against them because of their country of origin. So important to have a think about this, because if you're making a submission, you may want to pick a journal that's going to be using a certain kind of peer review, because you may feel as a researcher that that's better for you. Blind, double blind, the other two open, where no one's anonymous. Transferable, that's where peer review comments are shared between journals and publishers. You may have seen that, for example, on the Springer Nature manuscript transfer system. Your paper gets rejected from one Springer Nature journal. It can get transferred with the same reviews to another journal in the same family. So again, useful summary. Have a listen back to this recording. I'll send you the slides as well if you're interested. Blind, collaborative, portable, different kinds of peer reviews that different journals tend to use. So before you make your submission, it's important to check this. Check your journal instructions before submitting. Which kind is your journal going to use? And do you have an option as an author? Okay, we're talking about submission systems. We've talked so far about preparing to submit, and I've given you a quick checklist to have a think about when it comes time to make your next submission to an international journal. I've talked about ORCID IDs, getting an ORCID ID potentially to speed up the submission process and also to document yourself more effectively online as a researcher. And I've talked also about checking